Welcome into the Backroads Bill podcast. On today's episode, we are talking about bird banding. And if you don't know what that is, well, you're about to find out. And if you do know what that is, then you may be familiar with today's guest, Bruce Murphy, who is an expert at bird banding. He's been doing it for many, many years. Him and his team have also been instrumental in educating the youth about very similar to what you can do with Bill with the Ecology Center, where you can go out and you can take school trips there and learn about it. He has a very similar thing that they offer to students and young kids as well, to get them just kind of understanding about ecosystems, marshlands, birds, etc. So what they've been doing, the work that they've been doing there has been fantastic. He was gracious enough to join us over the phone today, and this episode is going to be really cool. So without further ado, here's our chat with Bruce Murphy. Well, we've had a lot of different people on the podcast that do different things, but this is a first time we've had a guest who specializes in birds. So Bill and myself want to welcome onto the program Bruce Murphy. He is the Research and Education Coordinator, I'm going to butcher this name, at the Hilliardton Marsh. Is that how you say it, Bruce?
It's pretty close, Hilliardton.
Okay. I'm not going to get that. How are you doing?
Oh, really good. Yeah, today's actually our first day of the season. So we just we had put the nets up yesterday, and the first bird out of a net this morning was a ruby-crowned kinglet. So it's a good way to start the season. And there's lots of kinglets around right now, and of course with this very unusual winter and early spring, there's lots of stuff around. So it's been exciting morning so far.
Well, I've got to get up there then if the nets are going up, because I've been up there before, and the listeners should, take the opportunity when they're in the Temiskaming Shores area. And we're going to talk about a lot of things today, Bruce. But tell us where the marsh is first of all, and just for location wise, and that'll get us started.
Okay, so the Hilliardton is about 20 kilometers north of New Liskeard, and just the other town that's very close is Earlton, and both those towns are about a little over 2 hours from North Bay, so that gives people a reference. And we're very close to the Quebec border, which makes things interesting for us, because we get lots of people from the Quebec side that want to come to see birds being banded as well. And it's a very unique in terms of geography, because we're influenced by Lake Temiskaming, which Bill, as I think you probably told me this once, that on the old maps it says the Ottawa River. So we think that we see a lot of birds that are traveling along from the Ottawa Valley into our area. The other thing that's very interesting is that we're right on the edge of the boreal forest, and yet there is farmland. So our area is referred to as the Little Clay Belt, because when the glaciers were receding, they dumped all this wonderful clay, which makes the area interesting for farming. And there is quite lots of dairy as well as cash crops in the area, which influences the birds that we get. So it's very, very interesting in terms of open area and the edge of the boreal. So it makes it really intriguing.
Yeah, that was very well described. And tell us a little bit about the initial evolution of the marsh through Ducks Unlimited, because that's a really interesting part of the story, and that's why it makes the Hilliardton Marsh so special.
Yes, yeah. So that's let's see. So that would have been back in 1993 is when the marsh was created. But prior to that, the marsh was part of it was farmland as well as wooded areas, and so they ended up purchasing the property from 5 different landowners. And to the north end, there's kind of an interesting story that as the farmer was clearing the land, he did it in the summer and the fall. And when he went back to continue clearing the land, he kept getting his tractor stuck. So he kind of gave up on the area. So what he did was he pushed the land, as farmers often do when they're first clearing, they push the trees into windrows. And so those windrows, and he never was able to finish. So that creates this beautiful sort of habitat at the north end of the marsh. And the marsh was a cooperative effort between, so they called it the Eastern Joint Habitat Venture, which was a partnership between the Ministry of Natural Resources, Ducks Unlimited, and Nature Conservancy of Canada. So they were able to get enough money together to purchase the land and to do the excavation. So the marsh is, it's called a dike impoundment structure. And basically what they did, it's kind of like if what all kids do when they're on the beach. They sort of dig kind of a moat, and then fill in go to the water and grab pail loads of water and throw it inside the moat. So what they did was they created this dike, and then they pump water from the Blanche River into the marsh. The marsh has 5 cells, which could be called ponds, which are all connected, and water is pumped into the furthest north cell. And each subsequent cell has a lower elevation. So the water gets pumped in and then basically is able to flow from one cell to the other. So, and the neat thing, which makes the marsh very unique and very popular for photographers, is that the berm is about 6 feet wide. So it's wide enough we can drive our truck to when we're doing maintenance. But the marsh, so because of that dike structure, it's higher than the water itself. So photographers and birders are actually able to look down into the water, and they can walk around the entire perimeter of the marsh, which makes it spectacular viewing for birds, and people will come out walking their dogs, and it's just like for people that love outdoor education, it's just wonderful to see people out there enjoying the birds, enjoying nature, doing iNaturalist stuff, whatever they're doing out there. It's just a perfect setting.
I wanted to ask really quickly, Bruce, because one of the things that Bill does at the Ecology Center is a lot of the education piece, and you were obviously talking about the education that you guys do, and you guys do a lot of school like trips and education for younger kids. What to you is so important to make sure that the younger generation gets this kind of education and kind of gets out into the world a little bit and sees the importance not just of birds and the marshes, but also just how the ecosystem works together?
That's a great question. So for me, to sort of steal a Star Trekian analogy. So kind of our prime directive for the marsh is getting birds into the hands of kids and people, because just creating that connection is so important. And we do it in a very controlled way that is safe for the birds. So we have a few rules that the kids have to be 10 years and older. And there's only certain species that will allow people to hold, because we're always like our other prime directive is of any banding station is the welfare of the birds. So like that is foremost, but to have that opportunity for kids to make that connection. And what I think in general, what people that are in outdoor education see, that there's just like people want to reach out and hold nature as much as they can. And I know sometimes that can create some issues where people are trying to take in orphans, which aren't actually orphans, but knowing that people they just want that connection, and to do that with young kids is such a powerful experience. I sort of think back to my own initiation in the birding world. I went to the Toronto Island, had a outdoor education center, and we went out one day and we caught chickadees, and I just thought this is such an incredible moment. And I think I've had kids that have come up to me when I'm like at a grocery store, and I've had kids come up to me and show me pictures of holding birds when, like, from 4 years previous. They have these like little like photo album that they just carry with them of their best moments at school, and it'll often be a picture of a bird that they were holding at the marsh. So I'm not sure if that totally answers your question. It's kind of a rambly answer. But the other thing that I think is kind of interesting, there's two other things that are kind of becoming more important to sort of our outlook and philosophy about the marsh. There's been so much, like since COVID, there seems to be so much exploring with families wanting to get nature experience. So we're seeing like this sort of resurgence of people trying to get their kids out. And the other part is there's more and more research, very recent research that's coming out about the therapeutic effects of nature. And in fact, I was reading or listening to a podcast called The Warblers, that is the Birds Canada podcast. And they were interviewing somebody who was one of the initiators of a system where doctors now are writing prescriptions for people to get into provincial and national parks for free. So it's like a prescription for nature, which I think is so important. And it just seems that, since COVID, it's just, and people, I guess that's the other thing that I'm kind of going on here, but it's sort of, it's people are talking about using birding or nature hikes as intentional ways of helping their mental health. So it's sort of getting back to that idea that, like, whatever the attributes are, and Bill would be better to speak about this, but whatever the attributes of nature and getting to the natural world is something that we absolutely need. And people will talk about vitamin N and vitamin nature, but there really is something to that. And the marsh, that's sort of part of what we're doing. And I'd like to expand that to see if there's ways that we could be connecting with groups that are seeking that, knowing that that's something that's important for their own well-being.
Yeah, I'm so glad you talked about vitamin N. We've talked about that on the podcast with a number of people in vitamin N and the benefits of that. And of course, I want to harken back to that comment you made about young people and their experiences and having that bird in their hand. I've been up there and I've had a bird in my hand, and there's nothing like that. And I may talk about my hummingbird experience and taking actually one of my most favorite photos close up with the stethoscope on the hummingbird's heart and listening to that heartbeat, and that was incredible. But I want to, the listeners of the podcast throughout Northern Ontario and beyond, is that they should know that the Thunder Cape and the Sibley Peninsula and Sleeping Giant Provincial Park and the Hilliardton Marsh are the only two bird banding stations in Northern Ontario, and that's important. So, excuse me. So, Bruce, tell us a little bit about the importance of birding and bird banding, please.
Yeah, so one of the Thunder Cape is an amazing banding station. One of the things I know about it is that access to Thunder Cape is a little more challenging. It's either about a 12-kilometer hike or a boat ride to get to the station. So it's and there's a fellow named John Woodcock that was instrumental in that, and they've started up recently. They started up another banding station that's right in Thunder Bay called McKellar Island. And John Woodcock actually was just recognized this year by the Ontario Bird Banding Association and won the Jeanette Dean Award, which is for a very distinguished and lifelong contributor to banding. So John's done a huge job in Thunder Cape and continues at McKellar now. And banding stations are, I think I'm biased on this, but just in terms of research, to be able to get bands on birds and to be able to track their migration is really important for trying to figure out what's happening with bird populations. And we're really seeing lots of changes with climate change. And numbers of birds are definitely changing. So it's just another sort of quiver in the bow of research to be able to put a band on a bird. The other thing that's a very recent thing that's happening with research and banding is something called the MODIS Wildlife Tracking System. And what that is banders can put a transmitter on a bird that is incredibly lightweight. The basic rule is that you can put on a bird that weighs to a maximum of 5% of their body weight. And these transmitters weigh less than that. And the transmitter, so basically, if these birds go past a antenna array, which just looks, and I kind of have fun with this because when we have school groups here and stuff, I say it looks like a TV antenna. Of course,
they look at you like you have three heads. Yeah.
Yeah. Say,
what's
are you
that?
going to pull it now? And anyway, so if the birds fly with this transmitter, if they fly within 20 kilometers of one of these towers, their signal gets picked up. Birds Canada just got a big infusion of cash. I'm not sure who they got it from, but so these towers are across North America and going into South America. We have a tower up here, but we're hoping to get a couple more just to be able to expand that array. So that kind of so basically what's happening now. One of the reasons we wanted to get the towers, they've been putting transmitters on shorebirds up in James Bay and into the Hudson Bay area as well. So they've been banning shorebirds. So we thought if we had a tower here, it would provide another piece in that network. And we've had birds that are flying from here, and then so every tower they pass by, their signal gets picked up. So we've had birds that leave from up in James Bay, and they get here within like 12 hours. So it shows. And every time they leave a tower, you get a time stamp, so you know how far the bird is, how long it's taken between stations. So it's and we've had birds here that were banded down in South Carolina that fly over the tower on their way up to James Bay. So banding just it creates that just the potential for research through banding has been well established, and the best part of it is that we get to share that with the public. So going back, we do get school groups coming through the Marsh. So usually we get between 50 and 20 each spring, and then again in the fall. And also we have the general public coming out during the week, and weekends is probably the biggest time when we're getting parents and their families. One of the other unique things about bird banding, it's I always tell people that it's sort of a unique opportunity for families, because often when parents are involved with their kids in whether it be swimming or hockey or some sports, parents are really spectators of the process. So when kids and parents are at the Marsh, they're both involved. And we have kids and parents that get to the point where they're both helping take birds out of the nets, and so they're and often it's kind of fun because there's times where kids are correcting their parents, so which is always a fun dynamic to watch. So it just gives it's just a very unique thing for families to be able to get engaged in. So it's. Yeah, sounded like a bit of a commercial, but
no. Listeners want to experience that and go up to the Hilliardton Marsh for sure. That leads me to some of that cutting edge research you've been doing on the buntings in particular, and and I remember because I've done a couple stories with you about this, is that what was thought to be with regards to migration now, some things that because of the marsh and its research, you've kind of I don't want to say disproven, but there's a new trend. But tell us a little bit about that bunting research.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite topics. Back to that tape analogy. We won't use up too much tape on this, but anyway. So what happened was, so they know that snow bunting numbers are experiencing a fairly significant sharp decline, and basically that relates to snow. So the buntings, usually their southern range is where there's snow. So they seem to be disappearing in southern Ontario. I was at a conference years ago and someone was telling me that they haven't had snow buntings in New York State in over 30 years because they hardly get any snow down there now. So what the premise was that birds that were in northern Ontario were just migrating from the Arctic, and they would come down here to maybe our New Liskeard area, maybe down into North Bay, and then they would winter there, and then they would scoot back north so basically they'd want to stay as close to their breeding range as they could. The birds in southern Ontario, they felt, were traveling east through Ottawa, then going through the St. Lawrence and jumping over to Labrador on their way to breeding in Greenland and that part of the Arctic. So what was happening is Joanne Goddard, my wife, she was banding with her students at Kearns Public School. So a lot of at that point, she was teaching grade 7 and 8. And the kids really became involved in the banding. And then, lo and behold, don't they start catching birds that were banded in southern Ontario? And then birds that we were banding started showing up in southern Ontario as well. So it seems that it's just a real mixing bowl, that the birds are going through the north and down into the south. And then there's another new part of the story, Bill, that you haven't heard before. I was just recently asked to go to Labrador to help train a fellow that's going to be banding in Labrador. And what he was doing, and he showed me his in his garage, which is he's got a workshop there. He has a window with feeders where the snow buntings congregate, and he had a fairly strong camera with a good telephoto lens. And what he was able to do is, through taking, I'm not sure how many pictures he would take of individual birds, he was able to figure out the band numbers of some of these birds that were at his feeder. So he had figured out about 7 or 8 different band numbers. And those were birds that were from southern Ontario. Some of the birds were banded in not too far from Montreal. So it just supports that trend that some of those birds are migrating from southern Ontario through Labrador. So to have a bander in Labrador is going to be great news. So, but there seems to be that trend that the birds are disappearing, but I think a lot of it relates to snow cover in the winter. Which the other thing that we found that was really interesting as well, which supports the idea that these birds are kind of in a mixing bowl kind of idea, is that so most of the birds that we catch in the north are males. And we catch maybe 5 to 10% that are females. And in southern Ontario, it's the opposite, that most of the birds they're catching down there are females. So it seems that the females are staying south and the males seem to be hanging north. So it's, lots of mysteries. And that's the other part about banding that I think is super exciting. The fellow that trained us to band hummingbirds used to always say that it's not what we know about these wonderful birds, it's what we don't know. And it just seems that the more research you do, the more questions that come up that need to be answered. So
yeah, that's a good segue for me to ask about. You can get certified to be a bird bander, and of course, I do recall the hummingbird, and there's only a handful in Ontario that can actually are qualified to put these teeny tiny little bands on a hummingbird that you have to take out of a net, and so on and so forth. But that whole bird banding, and I'm sure now at the Marsh you stepped up. I'm sure there's a lot more people that want to become certified bird banders, Bruce.
Yes, yeah, and we help out in that regard whenever we can, and it usually takes about 3 to 4 banding seasons to get your permit. So it's quite a commitment, and it can be very difficult to do because people with their work schedules. We see the trend is most often the people that are getting their permits are people that are just coming out of college or university because they have the time to commit to that. And so our banding season in the spring, we go from today, May 1st, to about June the 12th. So they get a 6-week opportunity to do that. And we often have people coming here from the state, a lot of people from the States, people from the UK, and yeah, so it's a chance to to have being trained for those periods of time. So then also, so people typically, as I mentioned, you probably would need about 3 seasons to 4 seasons, and it's we're super happy to do that. As you mentioned with the hummingbird, so Joanne and I traveled to West Virginia, and were trained by a bander from Alabama. And it was pretty intensive because, and the spot, it was amazing in West Virginia. There's just something about West Virginia where the hummingbirds during the migration congregate in July. And when Joanne and I got out of our vehicle, you could hear the hum of hummingbirds. It was incredible. Like I've never seen or heard anything like it since. And what they do, their strategy, which is super interesting, is they put up multiple feeders. So they had perhaps 30 feeders at this lady's home that we're at. And so Bob Sargent was the fellow that trained me. And their theory was that the more people hear the sound of hummingbirds feeding rather than fighting, the better chance that they're going to congregate. So that's why. So they never, because you've probably seen Bill, and I'm sure your listeners would tell stories about how there'll be an aggressive male that chases other males away from their feeders, and basically just dive bombing them all the time. So by presenting more feeders, then that won't be an issue. So we tried it when we got back up here. We put up like 20 feeders. It didn't seem to make a difference in the number of birds we were getting. So I just think there's something spectacular about that area in West Virginia. The other thing that Bob taught us, which I think through our banding has been borne out, because when we first came back, we had this idea that we would go to places where they have lots of birds. And we just found over time it was just too difficult to keep that up and keep banding up the marsh. But what his rule of thumb was to whatever number of birds they say they have on their property, multiply it by 4. So when people would say they would have 4 birds, we'd go and set our trap up to catch them. We would catch 16. So it seems, and I always love how people have a story about hummingbirds like hovering at their window if they haven't put the feeder out yet. So it's, and that's the thing I find. People, in terms of banding, the 2 species they love the most are hummingbirds and owls. Bill, you were out when we were doing the owl banding here, and you saw firsthand how people just adore saw-whet owls, and the chance to band owls is just, for me, I still pinch myself that it's something that we can even do. So
experiences, to be sure. Ben, Bird Boy Bruce bands buntings bravely. I don't know if that's alliteration or onomatopoeia, but
that's a lot.
But Bruce, another B. But tell us about what the facilities, because you've got some new digs there at the Hilliardton Marsh. Tell us about what's happened most recently and what people can expect when they come there.
Yeah, so we were able to get. We've been trying for years to get the funding to build a visitor center. So we were able to get that completed last June. And the big claim to fame that we have now is that people can enjoy a flush toilet when they come to the marsh. So, which was actually seemed to be a bit of an impediment for some visitors. So, for seniors and also for having younger groups, not having a bathroom was a bit of an issue. So we have that now. We call our visitor center the Hive, and it just creates a place where we just didn't have an area for people to really congregate, and to it just gives us more opportunities for programming. The next phase in our next plan is to create a more sort of wheelchair accessibility. So we just got a quote. So we have one set of nets that we have at the marsh we call the feeder nets, because we have bird feeders near there so that we can do research on seed-eating birds. So that's the nets that we tend to take the public to. And so now we'll be able to take persons with disabilities, and we're going to have that trail prepared so that we're actually going to put asphalt topping on it, so it'll be easier. And there's all sorts of levels of where people are at. So it could also be for people that need a walker, or even someone that's just a little unsteady on their feet. I just think it makes the marsh more accessible. So that's that's our newest initiative that we're taking on.
That's going to be huge. I wanted to take it back a little bit to the research for a second. And for some people, obviously, when you're really into birds or whatever you're researching, it's a really, really cool thing for that niche, or that the people who are doing it. Like, I get that way with audio engineering when you talk about compressors and EQs and all those things, and most people have no idea what you're talking about. Yeah. Most people will be like, cool, and you'll be like, oh, this is slightly different. So one of the things though with birds is the research that you guys do. It's very, very important, and not just from a bird standpoint, but also, correct me if I'm wrong, but more from also an overall climate standpoint. So I just wanted to ask a little bit, like, why is the research that you guys, or people who do the bird banding, why is that research so important to outside of just the bird community?
I think we sort of hit on this earlier. It's just a real, I'm not sure how I want to approach this. It's just, it just gives that, like, just with bird numbers in such sharp decline now, it just gives us that area that we can really narrow in on what's happening with bird populations. Because it just, like, it's not just climate change, but as people have been talking about for a long time, it's the loss of habitat. And just being able to figure out what is happening with birds, and where we need to really focus on habitat, because, like, there's as everyone's aware, there's limited dollars for to keep habitat, so to purchase land. So one of the ways to do that is through banding. And I've heard, I was at a conference where I heard somebody talking about how, like, especially coastal areas where birds are first landing after large migrations. So one of the key areas where birds are in peril is crossing the Gulf of Mexico, and that's where a lot of hummingbirds perish during that crossing. I can't remember. I think it might be 500 kilometers wide. I can't really remember right now, but anyway, if they have if a change of wind or whatever happens, so when birds land from after they make that migration, So what they're really looking for is a grocery store. So they're looking for like some prime habitat where they can refuel before they start the next part of their migration. And what they're finding instead is they're finding variety stores. So, which I think is a perfect analogy. The variety store will do, but if that's maybe not what you really want, like you really want to go somewhere where you're going to be able to really refuel. So those areas through banding, those are areas that we can also identify. One aspect that we do when we're banding as well is we always take a fat measurement of the bird. So there's a scale that we look at. So we blow on something called the furicula hollow, and that's where birds deposit fat. And that's something that you can sort of assess the health of the bird during the migration. And we're also we take their weight as well. So, but fat is really the fuel to the migration. So if a bird is crossing, so again, we'll go back to the Gulf of Mexico. If a hummingbird didn't get enough fuel before they started the migration and they basically run out of fuel mid Gulf of Mexico, they're going to perish. So it's so those areas become more and more important. So I think that's one. And the other thing that I would say about the research is that so there's something called the Canadian Migration Monitoring Network. And they've been looking at long-term trend analysis of birds. The Marsh is just about to join that network, so that our data can be part of that trend analysis. And I think that's probably the biggest aspect of how banding is important, to get that long-term trend analysis. Because if you're out there with binoculars and you're looking at birds, and people have been saying for a long time that we know that birds are in decline from all sorts of surveys that people are doing. I think banding data just gives that a little bit extra quantifiable data, because because basically the way that a banding station works is you put up the same number of nets the same days every year, so that you have something to. So it's not that the habitat's changing. And it's not that the amount of effort you're putting in is changing to catching birds. It's like something else has to be happening if the bird numbers are in decline through your banding data.
Wow.
So that was a long-winded.
Well, no,
awesome.
you touched so many things about the bird population decline and climate change and all the rest. This episode of the Backroads Build podcast is for the birds, but it's all about the Hilliardton Marsh and Bruce Murphy and the volunteers that have made it special. You've been recognized for your long-term efforts and will continue to do so. And I call you kind of an eco-hero, and the Hilliardton Marsh should wear that camp badge affectionately. And keep on doing what you're doing, and I'll be coming up the Highway 11 to visit you soon enough. Over to Ben.
Yeah, before we let you go, Bruce, I wanted to give a little bit of a plug to your podcast, Bird Banter with Boreal Bruce. Anything you want to tell us quickly about that?
We've been doing that for, I'm not sure how many episodes we're in on that, but it happens. It doesn't happen with the regularity that I would like, because Ben McPherson of BMAX Studios is the fellow that puts it all together, and he's not always available to. But the one thing that I really enjoy during the podcast is a chance to hear the backstory of our volunteers, because as Bill was just putting a mention there, like without volunteers, like we just wouldn't be able to do the research that we do. And if people, we do get people that come from Timmins and North Bay, and if people are interested in seeing more about the Marsh and or volunteering, even if it's not on volunteers don't need to come here for 6 weeks. It's good to have people that are coming, and we have lots of local people as well that help. So that the volunteer picture is huge, and But if people would like to visit us, they can go to find out more about events and all that sort of stuff. They go to our website, which is the World Wide Web, HilliardtonMarsh.com. So we'd love to show people around.
We were just about to plug that too. That's funny. I'll put the link in the description as well for people to get there easier. Bill, anything you wanted to end off with?
No, I've given the Hilliardton Marsh and Bruce a tribute, and again, I'm going to fly up that way and land in I don't want to say the nest, but I'm looking forward to my next visit to the Hilliardton Marsh. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Bruce.
Thank you, guys. That was fun.
Well, big thank you to Bruce for joining us, and you can definitely tell he is passionate about the work his team and himself do. And outside of just the field of bird banding, I said this in the intro, but the Marsh as a whole does a great job with the education and research components, and it's a fantastic place to visit. So if you are in and around the area, don't be afraid to check it out. It's only, if you're in North Bay, it's only within 2 hours of here if you're in this kind of area. So it's a pretty short drive, and it's definitely worth checking out. And speaking of checking out, you can check out other episodes of the Backroads Build podcast on your favorite podcast players. The video version's available on our North Bay Echo YouTube channel, and of course, over on NorthBayEcho.ca, where you can find a whole bunch of other podcasts. And this week, May 6th to 12th, it's currently Kindness Week and the CMHA's Mental Health Week here in Canada. And on our other Echo shows, To North Bay with Love and Echo Essentials, we actually had a couple of professors on from Nipissing University. They came in to talk about kindness. We talked about why, the psychological reasons, why do you act kind to each other? We talk a little bit about altruism and just overall spreading the word and message of kindness. If you want to know more about the initiative, of course, you can visit kindnessnorth.ca for more details. Well, that pretty much wraps things up here today, but join us next Wednesday as Bill and I bring you another Backroads adventure.